So glad to have you joining us here again on another week, another episode of Curiosity, Not Judgment. Welcome.
I'm Gary.
I'm Birga. I think you know who we are by now, but happy to continue the dialogue and asking some questions that hopefully get you thinking about things in a different light. So today, really the question, the theme at hand is ignorance bliss? And there's a couple reasons why I've been thinking about this. But you, of course, hear that phrase thrown around here and there. And it's often stated in the affirmative that ignorance is bliss. But is it? I tend to question these things. And is our not knowing something beneficial to us and beneficial to our lifestyle and our peace of mind? And so this is something I thought we could jump into today.
What do you do with knowledge? What do you do? So the opposite of ignorance is, I'll just say, is knowledge. For purposes of this, we could talk about wisdom as different than knowledge, but just for now, knowledge, right? Knowing something versus not knowing it. And is knowledge always a good thing, which is implied in that question? And how do we deal with the knowledge that we get? I think all that kind of plays into the series of questions that we like to do here, promoting the fact that curiosity, not judgment, is the thing. When you hear ignorance is bliss, what do you think? How do you judge that statement?
Well, I guess my gut reaction is somebody is saying that there is some news out there, wherever the out there is, that is distressing or distracting, and therefore not knowing preserves peace of mind.
But isn't that a judgment that the knowledge is distressing or disturbing?
Probably.
Yeah. Well, and I'm not saying anything other than, I think the same thing. To me, and again, everybody has their own bent. I'd rather know. I think I'd rather have knowledge than not have knowledge in certain situations. Now, then you could talk about the quantity of knowledge. How much knowledge is enough? One of the other things that one of my pet peeves is people who need perfect information before they make a decision. I think we could talk about how much information is necessary for a decision or for an action to occur.
Okay. So I feel like this can split off kind of into two subcategories.
Keep us focused.
All right. So let's start with inundation of news, inundation of information, and what that does to our sanity, what that does to our health and well-being. And this year, this calendar year, 2023 already has seen a rash of shootings where 4 or more people have died. So they're considered mass casualty events. Does the fact that the news gets out over and over and over again about something like this perpetuate violence and crime in the minds of those who want notoriety? Does it cause a general climate of fear and just kind of anguish? Or does it benefit us as a society to know these things so that we might be proactive in our stances moving forward?
People may have some baggage or some thoughts that are associated with shootings. So I'll give another example of where a lot of sociologists would say that the knowledge of something perpetuates more of it, and that is with suicides.
Yeah.
Legendary studies about certain cultures and geographic locations where suicides start happening, and it seems like there's a snowball effect. Now, there's always a correlation versus causation.
Sure.
Good question to be asked, but it seems to be that once people start hearing about it, it becomes more acceptable. It becomes an option, whereas it might not have been before. And is that a good thing or a bad thing? And I think it goes right back to is ignorance bliss? What information and how are we receiving information in our daily lives? How intentional can we be about receiving information? And can we intentionally figure out those things that matter versus don't and provide adequate filters for ourselves?
I don't know if we can provide adequate filters for ourselves because, as we've talked about in the past, much of the way that we receive information, whether it be through an online source like a online publication, social media, etc., we know that our viewing habits, our news absorption is being tracked, and therefore the algorithms that are in place continue to feed you similar news stories or similar public interest pieces to keep you engaged and to keep you coming back. They want your eyes on the screen. But then you are once again caught in this cycle of more information, potentially more devastating news, and what that does to your overall well-being, I think really has to be called into question.
It does. And how much do you create an echo chamber in your head of your own thoughts and thoughts that you like, and validating those thoughts by saying, well, a lot of people think this way. And it's interesting, especially in our day and age, as we sit here talking in America in February 14th, Happy Valentine's Day, of 2023, and that is, are we setting ourselves up to, and are the algorithms exacerbating the problem, into two camps on everything? And do we expect our own group? I saw a presentation just yesterday that there is no difference between progressives and ultra-rights because they both believe, 90% of what they believe is the same, in that they expect a group to think and agree with them, and the other group is bad. And the point that the author was making was, true middle of the road or true liberalism or true conservatism is probably up here. It's like he starts out with a line that says, here's ultra progressives and here's ultra alt-rights. But what if you curved that around? You'd see that these folks have more similarities than differences. And the people up here who are the true conservatives or liberals who can have real good debates and change their minds a little bit each way, how we are receiving information, so back to ignorance is bliss, is the very way that we receive information, is it self-reinforcing to the point where it puts us more into a corner and against others?
I feel, I can't back this up with hard and fast data right now, but I feel that yes, we are kind of studying ourselves into a corner, right? The deeper you dive into an online source to get information, the more you're going to be pointed towards sources of information that agree with the original theme or thesis that you're conducting the research upon. But thinking just in general about, let's not even do the polarization of, progressives, conservatives. Let's just talk about news and exposure to news. So when we have devastating things that happen globally, and we have instant access to that news, does it benefit us because we are a global community, or does it do us a disservice because we are constantly bombarded with the images of devastation? And I'm thinking about the earthquake in Turkey and Syria. And, were we 100 years ago, we would never have known that news. Maybe ever in our lifetime. But now, because of the world in which we live, we have daily updates and daily death tolls, hourly. We have the images, we have the fundraising efforts, we have all of the things that are tied into this news that's coming from the other side of the globe. And while I am not advocating that we shouldn't know that information, I really am trying to ask this as a curious question. Does it benefit us to know all the time the bad news that's happening all across the globe?
So let's ask another question that I hope isn't tangential. How useful am I to my fellows if all I'm doing is researching and or allowing myself to be exposed to stuff that's going on in the world that I can do nothing about? And there's the other extreme of, what if I'm a monk and I'm just contemplating, stuff and the meaning of life all the time, and yet I don't interact with people.
Right.
I think that there's a dichotomy there too.
Sure.
There's two, but at what point? Okay, so me personally, my own personality, I would say to the monk, okay, all that deep meaning you've found, go share it with others and have a good dialogue about it. And I would say the same thing about the news. Okay, what does it mean to you, and are you interacting with other people? To me, being relational, I told this to somebody just yesterday, and I don't know if we've discussed it here before, but Robert Fulghum, one of my favorite authors, who wrote Everything I Needed to Learn, I Learned in Kindergarten. He does a series of short stories that are all amazing. But one of them is how we should all be more players. Not playas, not the new term, this was written before that, players. In other words, in life we should play. When you're at the grocery store, now this is old neighborhood stuff, and today, we got to be careful what we do here, but he would change carts with somebody without them knowing and see how long it would take them to notice, and then laugh together. And how much are we interacting intentionally with our neighbors?
Bringing levity
And joy and peace and the things that go with that by play, like children naturally do.
Yeah.
How much do we lose that as adults, and how much are we doing now versus being inundated with information? So I think there's a part of that. I don't have 24-hour news on all the time, and in our house the TV is not allowed to just be on. We have a specific thing we're watching. It's going to be recorded, and we're recorded, I'm using old terms. We're going to stream it and we're going to turn it off, right? And we don't just sit and watch the 24-hour news cycle. And but I do appreciate listening to my one burst of news when I first wake up in the morning after my quiet time. I want to know in general what's going on during the day. But how much is enough?
Yeah. And I think that's going to depend on where you find yourself on that stress rating, right? Which we have talked about in several different episodes. Your stress and anxiety are absolutely being impacted by the things that you're ingesting.
No question.
Food, people, content, the things that you are taking into yourself are a direct reflection, or there will be a direct reflection in your stress and anxiety level. So you'll have to make that determination. So there's some other categories where I can think of the importance of knowing, and for groups of people that elect not to know, it negatively impacts how they're able to love their neighbor or interact with others. And so if you're unaware, for example, that autism is a thing, if you are not familiar with people that are on the spectrum, you don't know how certain behaviors might manifest, you don't know about certain situational issues like struggling with eye contact and other things of that nature, and you go into a situation with somebody on the spectrum, your ignorance may very negatively impact that ability to connect and to have positive relationship, because you're going to make some assumptions, you're going to make some judgments based on your ignorance.
That's a fascinating question. And so then, what is our responsible as individual citizens? What's our responsibility to understand autism, based on the fact that we're probably going to run into somebody who's on the spectrum today? And so that's a great question. I know when I worked with the homeless, I always used to look them in the eye, because that's something I heard from them that people don't do. They act like they're invisible.
Right.
People who have handicaps, treating them, as normal people, and how do you do that? People who are grieving.
Yeah.
It's okay to sit in silence. You're not going to fix their grief.
Yeah.
You don't say to them, "Oh, I've been through that." You haven't.
Right.
Right? It's all different. And so it's a great question. How do we understand and come to understand different folks in different situations, and what is our responsibility to do that? Is ignorance bliss in that situation? Probably not, if you want to be useful to your fellows.
Yeah, exactly. So, there's so many applications where I think we can ask ourselves that question and to take a moment to pause and reflect and say, is ignorance bliss right now? And the right now may be in a social setting, it may be in a situation where you have found yourself very high on the stress level for weeks on end, and you recognize you've been consuming a lot of media. I think that is going to be a very personal question that's going to have to be answered internally, and it's going to vary circumstance to circumstance.
It will. And I think that this is, I guess one of the things that we are trying to get across with this is it's good to reflect every once in a while, right? The unexamined life isn't worth living. And to say, am I okay with the way things are going now?
Yeah.
Should I make some alterations in the amount of information that I get and how I get it and how intentional I am in that? Another aspect of this is health. I remember my youngest daughter at one point was fascinated with this new study of genetic psychologists and genetic social workers, and I'll give you an example of this. So there are certain genes that cause certain things, from Huntington's disease to breast cancer and other things. And there are some genes that are present in children that will portend their early demise. At what age do you tell a child?
Yeah.
I mean, those are tough questions.
Huge.
There are not easy answers to that, because why would you affect someone's childhood with the fact that they're going to probably die at this age? Or the other flip side of that is, do we have a responsibility to tell that child so that they have the information? And at what point can a child even process that information?
Well, and I've heard that a similar line of questioning about people that have been adopted in a closed adoption situation where you don't have access or information about the biological parents. And if there is some sort of health concern, if you need access to genetic predisposition and potential diagnoses, how do you go about getting that?
Or is it useful?
Yeah.
So in those situations, and I think and this might come down to the individual, and this might be something that people need to decide on their own. I mean, there are people who sign up. There's something called 5 wishes. How do I want someone to pull the plug? In which state, etc. So I think being intentional about that, and it can be up to the individual. And so, do I want to know? Is a fair question to ask myself, and then if I have information about someone else, what's my responsibility to share it?
Yeah. I want to shift in the last few minutes that we have left to kind of transition to talk about this question in the workplace. So I was in radio for a long, long time, and typically you get an air check about once a month. So as an on-air personality, you would have a portion recorded and your manager would review it with you. They would listen back to the quality of your, I'm going to say performance, that's not exactly what it was, but you get what I'm trying to share in this example. And in many, many different work scenarios, you will have your work analyzed by both a supervisor, but then also potentially by your peers. So whether you've got ratings to contend with, as in a media job, or if you've got reviews coming in from colleagues, there are oftentimes some sort of a ranking situation or some sort of an anonymous comment box, whatever the case may be, where others get to say what they feel about your performance. And in that case, is ignorance bliss?
Yeah. I was around in the 80s in the corporate world where there was a big movement that instead of your manager being your sole source of feedback on your job, that they did these things called 360 reviews, where your peers would anonymously rate you and talk about you, and that was folded into your review. And as a manager, I was at Intel at the time, and we were told, this is what we're going to do, and we need to go help sell this to the masses. And I did. I was not very good at selling things I didn't believe in, and then this one I did. I thought, wouldn't I rather know? But the other argument is, what what difference does it make? If there's something that's part of me, that's part of my personality, maybe I can't even change that. So is ignorance bliss?
Certainly.
Especially if I can't change it. Let's say if 4 out of my 7 peers all said that they didn't like this about me, and yet that's kind of who I am, or with that feedback I choose not to change it. Is it better that I don't know?
Yeah. It's a valid question, and you could certainly make argument if you've got 4 out of 7 people disliking a characteristic or a quality about you that you don't feel like you can change. Does that mean it's time for a new work environment? I mean, is ignorance bliss in this case? Do you want people to just, secretly go about disliking this aspect of you so that you can continue in your job and continue on status quo? Or do you need to know these unpleasant things about yourself even if you can't make a difference? And so, again, it's going to boil down to the individual and how they can handle the information.
What I would generally tell people in my own conclusion and how I felt about it was, I'd rather know. Now, whether or not I do something about the information is a different thing, because I always am accused of outrunning people and moving too fast, and or not doing proper planning or identifying risks properly, or being so far out there in a blue sky world of optimism that I don't have any reality. And so, and some of that's true, and some of it I think is necessary. I mean, of course there's yin yang, and you want to have just as many planners as provisional thinkers in a good organization. But there are some things that, thank you for the feedback, and I'm going to continue that. Now, that may rub some people the wrong way, and others may hire me for it, right? And so it is the, beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah, certainly. Well, I am very curious what, the running poll is here for those listening or watching. What do you think? Is ignorance bliss? I would very much like to see some of your comments. Please feel free to weigh in, whether you're watching this on YouTube, you're listening to it on one of the podcast platforms, and you can leave a comment, or if you want to just jot us a note over at curiositynotjudgment.com. I think this is one that we're going to have to just repeatedly ask ourselves, as I shared earlier, in various situations, and consider carefully what the internal answer may be, because it definitely impacts us, our mental health, but then, in many scenarios will impact the people around us.
And how useful we are to them. And I think that has to be one of the gauges, I would say personally, one of my gauges of whether I need to make change in my life and where I'm going is who I'm becoming, and what that influence is on those around me. Am I being useful to my fellows? And I think that there should always be some curiosity around that with respect to what knowledge we do receive, how we receive it, the quantity we receive it in, and how often we're interacting with people versus being in our own heads.
Yeah. So give it some thought. Mull it over and let us know what you think. Is ignorance bliss? We will catch up with you next week, and until then, stay curious.
Take care. Bye-bye.